Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Emanuele Chisari. I'm the secretary of the Oxford University Italian Society, and I am here with Alessandro Cavallo, the treasurer of Oxford University Italian Society. Our guest tonight is Dr. Fabio Bianco, who is the chief scientific officer at Bio for Dreams, a business nursery based in Milan, Italy. We're going to talk about innovation. We're going to talk about the Italian ecosystem in comparison to Europe in general and UK. And we're going to focus specifically on the role of innovation in the life science and how Italy, UK, and Europe are using different approach to improve what we can do and serve our patients with better care. So before starting, just a brief introduction about what Dr. Bianco did in his life so far, which is quite a lot. Dr. Bianco received a degree in medical biotechnology in 2003 and then a PhD in pharmacology in 2006, both from the University of Milan. In 2007, right after his doctorate degree, he founded Neuro-Zone, which is a contract research organization focused on delivering highly technological products for increasing efficacy in drug discovery. And after that, in 2016, he founded a second company, BrainDTech, which focused on the development of biomarkers for brain disease and from liquid biopsies. Other than being a serial entrepreneur, Dr. Bianco is also the chief scientific officer, as I was saying, of Bio for Dreams, which is an incubator, or as they like to call a private business nursery, that works specifically with early stage innovative startups and the life science, initially in Italy, but now all over Europe. Other than that, he is a consultant for multiple companies. He still has some scientific reviewer board roles for both journals and private companies, and is involved in multiple society for drug discovery and development in the life science. Dr. Bianco, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure for us for having you. I think the best thing to start will be if you would like to talk a little bit about what you do with Bio for Dreams, what is your current role there, so that people that are listening can understand more about your context and your background.
Well, thank you, Emanuele, first of all, and good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and thank you for this very kind invitation and for the presentation. Bio for Dreams is kind of a strange entity, and it's I would say a big challenge that we have so far decided to put in front of ourselves. We call ourselves a business nursery because over the years we have experienced also in our entrepreneurial experiences the difficulty in this part of the world, South and Europe, to translate the results of research, which many times are great in terms of patient, in terms of return of investment on the money spent on research, but it's difficult to land it towards a market application. And this translates into a very, very fragmented ecosystem around the concept of technology transfer. And so with Bio for Dreams, we're trying to bridge that gap. We try to really work in what we call a nursery of entrepreneurial activities. And we will have a chance maybe to chat about that. But the real work that Bio for Dreams is doing is trying to understand the science of a specific project, translate it alongside, hands-on with the content provider into a language that can be interpreted by who comes after. Could either be a financial or an industrial partner. We basically work on what we call a very early scientific phase of a project. When research are coming out of a laboratory, results are starting to become of interest, and you need to transfer this information into a wannabe startup and then incorporate it into an innovative startup. That's what we do. And my role is to somehow direct all the scientific activities of our network towards these results.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. I mean, before going more in deep, related to what you do with Bio for Dreams and your entrepreneurial experience, we wanted to start to kind of looking at the investment landscape and the innovation landscape that is across Europe, but specifically UK. As you know, our society is based in Oxford as part of the Oxford University, and therefore most of the people listening to this interview are students at Oxford at the moment or were students at Oxford in the past. Um, as you probably know, the Oxford environment and ecosystem is very dynamic, very strong, and thanks to all the work that's been done also by the university in the last few years. One thing that worries a lot people working here is that the Brexit, because with the UK leaving the European Union, obviously this brings many issues related to both legal point of view, investment point of view, access to grants and not dilutive funding. So we were wondering if you can give your opinion on that as a professional in this area.
Well, yeah, Brexit is definitely a momentum for our ecosystem here in Europe, but it's both, I guess, a land of challenges and a land of opportunities. Let me make it clear. And of course, there are challenges. Now, if you want to register a drug, you need to come to Europe. Is not sufficient anymore. So you need to land and discuss with EMA and all. It creates, for sure, an opportunity for Europe rather than the UK. But on the other side, UK has been so far the leading player in all the biotech sector for Europe, and that doesn't change. The quality of the science there is the same. The quality of certain industry versus research or research to industry talks have been a guiding light for the replica of similar things in other parts of Europe. So that's a value that remains and stays. The funding, yeah, there are definitely, and I'm not the best person to discuss the opportunities of the European grant, referring to the public grant sector. But as you know, this is only one opportunity. There are many other different you can collect. I would say that the focus must be on the research, because that's really, there are no good ideas or bad ideas. There are wannabe ideas in the early stage of a startup. There are wannabe ideas with an execution plan that must be taken care of. So as long as the results coming out of a research lab are unique, novel, interesting for the market, the matter is how you execute it. And this is an opportunity, because if you somehow develop something that is novel, unique, and useful for a specific market, then it really doesn't matter where you do it. And you can do it from your home in the UK, but have the activity plan somewhere else in the world, and vice versa. We, for example, BrainDTech is incorporated in Italy, is running the clinical studies in Hungary, and has a strong collaboration with the UK dementia ecosystem, and is planning to start an operative sites in the US. And it's still only 10 people. So, I mean, it's not really where you live that creates the opportunity, how you execute your plan towards the market. So I would say that's the best answer for Brexit, because if you think about Brexit this way, then you can also look at it on the other side, and the opportunity that a UK-driven ecosystem might provide for those companies that are not in UK and that want to access the well-established clinical network, research network, financial network, for that matter, that is available in the UK.
Very interesting. And when we looked at your profile the first time with the rest of the group, one thing that was very impressive to us is that you are a chief scientific officer inside a company that works as an incubator, accelerator, or business nursery, as you said. That's not necessarily the most common thing, especially if we look at venture investment and venture capital firms, that are very different from what you do, but still are in the same ecosystem. Usually we talk about investment team, advisory board, and maybe some support staff, but there is not really a role, for a chief scientific officer, a chief medical officer, and so on. I think that's very interesting and powerful. I was wondering, what is your take on this, and what is your role inside your company, and do you see in the future, even for more traditional investment company like venture capital firms, for example, to have a chief medical officer, to have a chief scientific officer, and be, maybe more evidence and more science driven in their approach to investment and to incubation and acceleration?
This is a very, very interesting question, which bears many other questions inside of it, but I'll try to answer that very directly. There is a real unmet need, I would say, in the current dynamics of interaction between the startups and the investors, which is challenging the science. Now, I've been entrepreneur myself and launching project, and most of the discussion were on the science that I was proposing, taking it for granted and working on a business plan that I envisioned for my science. But there are many different aspects that you want to take care of, especially in life science project. I'll come back to this concept. For sure, there is the science proposed by the startup, which must be addressed, and so you have to have key opinion leaders in the clinical settings and understanding whether the science is really truly exciting. But on the other side, you need to that's not sufficient. You need to implement that with industrial opinions, and all this must be done prior to any financial undertaking on the project. So there must be a clear need. And unfortunately, we often see projects which are pushed towards the market, investors who have invested into the project because of whatever type of decision making they've done or an analysis on the project, but really are struggling to get something out there which the market for some reason doesn't want to have. There are logics which are scientific and industrial that must be taken care of. I was mentioning the fact that this is particularly important in the life science field, and this is a strategic decision that has been made by our team. In life science, especially in very early stage project in life science, you still will have to go through a lot of iteration on the project and a lot of revisitation of what you're actually doing. So you must have the original scientific team on board, and you can only engage them if you talk the same language. So that's the starting point of interaction. We are talking with scientists about their science as scientists. That's the starting point. You need to understand what's the value that they have been producing, so that from there you can try to build confidence onto the project, build trust from their side in order to help them direct the project onwards. Otherwise, you're missing this initial link, which is fundamental if you're driving or you want to drive a life science project toward the market, which will necessarily go through many different steps of revisitation. If you don't do that, you end up having a zombie project, something that is an asset that is still not mature to be treated as a real industrial asset from people who usually manage assets like managers. You can always build up a CEO or executive team around a project, but you do that once the project is structured to a level that it can absorb those type of expertise. And it's not just a matter of stipend, it's a matter of how you bring forward the project. In the early stages of the project, you need to translate the scientific, the expectancies of the scientists with respect to what really the project can deliver. That's still a missing element. So we strategically decided to start from scratch and to have a team of people built up of different expertise. We have biomedical engineers, we have biologists, chemists, veterinarians. We have all sorts of expertise around the field of our competence, which is life science in a broader spectrum, from diagnostic to therapeutics to medical devices. And that's the starting. We want to really dig into the science, and we need to be convinced about the science and about the applicability of that science onto a specific market. And then we do the same with the market perspective in terms of what is the industry think about the project. If I develop that solution, will the doctor actually use it, or will the solution provide a an answer to an unmet need. And then once we have all these elements, we start working again with the scientists to translate their expertise into the potential end use. By doing this exercise, we actually realized that we are collecting much more information from the team and their potential asset with what they're actually telling the investors. And we end up having a set of asset which is much larger than what they're claiming to have. Because we realized that, for example, they might be pushing ahead for the investment a particular drug, but they have a significant expertise of chemistry behind them and things like that, which are quite common. So the scientists overall have really an impressive amount of data in their hands. And when they think about an entrepreneurial adventure, they tend to focus on some selected little pieces of the overall expertise that they have developed over the years. Our job is to really take a blank sheet of paper in front of us and learn what they can really provide. And that oftentimes is a source of interesting new elements.
Thank you, Dr. Bianco. And I personally hope that this trend and this decision that you and your company took will become always more common, both in Europe and outside of Europe, for similar companies. And
I think
I'm thinking,
it is.
yeah.
This is something, just to finish up, sorry to interrupt you, but this is something that will eventually have to go that way, because there's a lot of investment money available out there, but there is more and more the need of matching that money with early stage project or with complex project. And that complex project or early stage project requires a significant amount of science in order to drive those investments. So it will become eventually something that the venture capitals or other operators might not just take from outside as a consultants. They must have it internally into their pipeline.
So either join the movement or die, trying to do something different. Makes sense. So talking about science, obviously, I think this is the best time to leave Alessandro continue this as PhD student here at Oxford. Of course, he knows a lot about this relationship with the academia industry. Alessandro, please.
Thanks, Manuela. Thanks, Fabio, for the very interesting responses so far. So I have a few more questions, starting from sort of broadening the context to the Italian life sciences startup ecosystem as a whole. So, do you think the life sciences sort of startup ecosystem in Italy is competitive in a European context, and in particular relative to comparable countries like France, Germany, and the UK? And what do you think is specifically are Italy's strengths in this sector? And on the other hand, what are the obstacles that we need to overcome?
Honestly speaking, we're not competitive yet. Okay, what do I mean by that? Great science. We're always on the top ranking scale with respect to publications, citation, impact factor, whatever. So great science being produced in this part of the world. But if you talk to a director of an innovation center, of a scouting center, one of the corporates, they will tell you that Italy is not even on the radar. Okay, because if they think of innovation and where to purchase innovation, they're thinking about UK, they're thinking about Germany, they might think about Switzerland. End of the story. Full stop. Why did that happen, even though we have great science? Well, we tend to lose traction along the way. We have, I think that today in Italy we have more operators than startups. This might be a general, little energetic sentence out there, but the concept is that there's so many different ways that a startup can engage with consultants and players and VCs and business angels. They don't even have an understanding of where to go. Now, this is creating a very bad situation from my point of view, which is losing credibility as a sector. You have startups that are spending years in running different crash courses and going to different award games and or whatever type of startup competitions, but not really going forward onto their main. Okay, this is an ecosystem of different players, which is valuable. I'm not saying that this ecosystem is not valuable. Every single operator, stakeholder along the way of technology transfer has good inputs and can provide great information. But there is a missing concept, I would say, it's not taught to the startuppers. That you don't have to live on that. You have to build on that and use those elements that you select as good players for you in order to take this forward. And I think this is very, very important. What Bioforteams is trying to do is fill this gap. Projects today arrive at the Technology Transfer Office of the university for exploitation.
I think you broke up a little bit there.
Hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. So what's really missing is somebody that can help the companies either die immediately or go as fast as possible towards the market. Okay. So there is a need to take somehow of a joint effort between all of these different stakeholders that today are represented, the business angel, the venture community in Italy, in order to work together jointly onto these projects. That creates working jointly means to have the similar ways of evaluating a company stage, to have opportunities for de-risking jointly a project. So the startup doesn't have to go and talk to every single player along the way, losing a lot of time, but maybe some of the stakeholders can put their force together and work on that. And this is really something that to me is common sense, but I understand that it's quite novel with respect to the ecosystem. And by the way, when I mean ecosystem, I'm not only talking about Italy, I'm talking about all the Eastern European countries that have a similar story. Because we're present in different countries, in Hungary, in Poland, in Slovenia, and we see the similar scenario. So in order to make this fragmented ecosystem, but a valuable ecosystem, a little bit less fragmented and create more of a critical mass, you need to have these different stakeholders work together. We have tried to do something like that. We have a program called Innovation Circle, which is taking all these different stakeholders of the technology transfer value chain onto the same round table, and each of them can present a particular startup they like, and jointly the different players not only say what's in, that's everybody's capable of doing that, but also what they can provide to that project in order to boost it forward. And so you have VCs who are willing to put a chip on it, maybe some pharma companies who are willing to do some regulatory strategy for the project. And so everybody can put on a little bit of their expertise. That creates value. That creates a little bit of a highway on which you can put all the different pieces of the puzzle together. And if you're able to do that, then you're more probably able to take projects from the early stage all the way towards the tech transfer. Otherwise, you are leaving the success stories to few personal experiences like we're having in Italy. We have great success story in the biotech field, but they all are somehow reference of a single person that made it all the way through. You're not creating a critical mass. Critical mass means that you might be losing a specific project because it's not matching exactly the market need, but you have the pipeline ready for the next projects to come in. That's what you want to have. And I think this is the most important thing that we're missing. We're not missing money. Money is there available. We are missing a real infrastructure for creating a critical mass of startup projects.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. It's very interesting to hear you say that money is not the issue, as one would perhaps expect. It's but on the other hand, it sounds like it will be more difficult, I think, to solve than just throwing money at it, right? You'll need to.
Well, yeah, we are. I can bring you some stories. There. Let me put it that way. Premises. We're working on the early stage. Early stage means that we go from 200K to or maybe a little bit more than that. We have received requests by companies that were looking for €500,000 to €1,000,000, and they were struggling to find the money on a business plan which was totally absurd. They were thinking about purchasing technologies, send them to their distributors, and what they were really looking at was they had an expertise that they wanted to keep in-house of a specific process. And so we were challenging them on the strategy and asking them, what's the real value of your project? Where does it reside? Because if it resides in your product, told us, then that's the thing that you want to click on. And you don't need to look for a VC investing €500,000 for some equity stake because you haven't demonstrated anything yet. Maybe you can ask for a loan, and guess what? The government is giving loans currently for those type of projects that are in your stage. So it's a change of paradigm with respect to the strategy. Create your own labs, and then once you're ready and you have validated that, then you can look for larger investment because your pre-money will be different. So it's really challenging the project and defining the best way forward. And for this type of activity, you don't need always huge amount of money. That's the other point. We are, as Bio4Dreams, looking at projects which are going to define a solution. It doesn't really matter if they are going to be the next unicorn down the line or the next high risk, high gain project. Of course, everybody would love to have a high risk, high gain project in the pipeline. But for us, it's more important to have a system of sustainable startups or startups with a clear path forward. Because even if you have a company that is not skyrocketing high developing, but it's still meeting a specific market need, bringing that company into the ecosystem strengthens the other companies as well. And so we will not be the guys saying, here's the money, don't think about anything else, just get the product out there, and if you need more money, we can give you more. That's the game that comes after. We are telling companies, develop your program, but if in the meantime you can do some things, some services, some activities to make yourself less dependent on to your project. You still there?
Yes. Can you still hear us?
Yes,
I think you
very
broke
well.
up for a while. Okay, yeah. Okay, I can hear you again now. Yeah. Okay, thanks for the very interesting insights. So my next question is about, so you must work with a lot of founders, of course. So an often talked about point when it comes to biotech startups is whether it is better to found a startup as a senior academic or industry expert, so with years of experience, or as a fresh graduate or PhD graduate. And what I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the pros and cons of founding a startup as a relatively inexperienced graduate? And in your experience, have young entrepreneurs had the same level of success with their startups as the more experienced ones?
That's a very nice question. We never thought about age as a key element. We focus on the commitment to the project. So going back to the concept we shared before about the necessity of having the team involved, because this early stage lifestyle project will need to go through a series of modification and reevaluation of the asset. It becomes important to have the team engaged. Now, if you could be a PI in a university setting with some postdocs, or you can be a young guy waking up early in the morning thinking about the project, but you must be committed to that project. Okay, it will make a difference, because in any case, it won't be sufficient to make the project. So we are not looking for startuppers that are CEOs from day one. We don't care about having that as a CEO, as long as we have the team guaranteeing on the content. Now, that could be lab manager, a chief scientific officer, a chief technical officer, a CEO in the future, doesn't matter, as long as he's committed. We're going to work with him in order to bring alongside all the other expertise which are needed to make the project work, as long as they are committed. Now, that could be a PI that, cannot focus on the everyday operational activity, but can provide the gate opening effect of his strong academic experience. On the other side, it could be a young guy managing perfectly the science, but not knowing where to go onto the business. As long as that team is involved, then you can create a story around it. But that's the key element.
Thank you very much. And as a follow-up to this question, I think you've sort of answered a part of my next question as well. Do you have any specific advice for students or potentially also PhD students like myself considering a career in the biotech industry and perhaps considering founding a company someday? Any specific advice for people just starting or about to start?
Well, making or starting a company, it's really an exciting adventure that has lots of difficulties in between, but some of them are due to the misunderstanding between what are the expectations and what's real life. So maybe these are things that you can get rid of beforehand. First element, you won't do it yourself. End of the story. So if you have an idea, you must enter into the mindset that you will have to share your idea, you will have to share your expertise, and guess what? You will have to share your company's stakeholders with stakes with somebody else who is going to help you along the way. Okay, that's the first element. And I'm saying it's a mindset because the question is with whom you're going to do it, not whether you're going to do it or not. Okay. Otherwise, if you think about doing it yourself, please, that's the road and just do it. But that's an important element. And many people are not accepting that. Many people have a difficulty in signing an NDA or have a difficulty in giving you an exclusivity for 3 months in order to evaluate the project. That's what I say. It's a mindset problem. First element. The second element is to address as much as possible the market need prior to start the project. And I say that because, everybody loves its own baby, and there's not a more conservative person than the researcher developing its own idea, because you feel that you have been fighting all your life, demonstrating through publication that you are the art, actually a bit beyond state of the art. Okay, and you know how to do that business. You know how to engage with the top scientists worldwide to defend your science. But now the problem is, how am I going to apply this science, which I take it for granted is top level, in order to make it a usable tool for the market? And that's a totally different story. Okay, so nobody is going to question, we are doing it, but generally speaking, nobody's going to question the level of the science. Let's take it for granted, the great science. Okay, but how is that transferable or into a language where you have to talk about deliverables, milestone, go-to-market strategy, pricing strategy, and elsewhere, okay? This is topics that are as equally important, if not more, than the science that you are addressing, okay? So if you want to start a startup, it's exciting. It's probably one of the avenues in the future about how a lot of the PhDs will actually find their way forward, because university overall is not able to absorb as much PhDs as they're delivering, and probably there's not a need for that. There is a lot of unmet questions out there. Let's stick to the healthcare sector. There is a lot of unmet topics out there, whether it's therapeutics, diagnostics, and it's absolutely accepted by the market that this innovation most probably will come from new companies, new startups, okay? If you talk to the CEOs of the major pharma companies, they will tell you that more than 90% of their expected increase in revenue will come from acquisition of innovation from outside, Okay, so the mindset of the big company is already driven towards the acquisition of know-how from outside. But this must be done on day one, because you have a great idea, but if it doesn't somehow develops an interest on the market side, then it's going to be difficult to take it out there. So the two things that I would suggest is, define yourself in a mindset that you will need to work with somebody else on your project and share your idea with somebody that can support the execution of that idea, and try to discuss or try to learn from what's out there on the market, whether your solution will actually be needed to somebody. So not starting from the scientific perspective, but look at it from the market perspective.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think having the right team is probably the first step, and then of course making sure that there's a market need, of course. Yeah. So
And
so
the team many times is something that you can find along the way. So you need to have you don't have to take care of having all the different expertise, as long as your idea is solid and meets the need, and you're willing to put yourself into the game. The element, the rest you can find.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that's also one of the sort of services you provide at Bio4Dreams, right? Do you also link up founders with potential, team members? Is that also part of your?
It's something that we do, but everybody does. I'm citing, for example, in Finland, we have Hudson Capital Partners with whom we're working, and they're doing exactly the same. The logic is that if you have a good idea and a good starting team, you can build on top of that. Okay. Then it's a matter again of execution, because maybe you don't need everybody inside the team on day one. You need to get to a certain level of validation before doing that, and you might want to outsource the activity. So, for example, in our case, the team, we have projects gone very well down the road, still being, I'm not saying a one-man show, but a few people's man show. And then the real team will be developed once you will go for a Series A, Series B, or larger investments. Okay, but that's already 2 or 3 years down the line when you have already validated your project. So you don't have to have everything inside on day one, but you need to partner with somebody that can support your development to that stage.
Thank you very much. So my next question is somehow related. So we hear a lot about the sort of failure rate, between inverted commas, of biotech startups, and it's often generalized as 9 out of 10 startups that end up failing. However, that we know that varies with the financing stage. How have you mitigated this risk in your career, and what do you think is the most likely factor determining failure of a new venture from what you've seen? You mentioned earlier that often sort of new startups and new biotechs are pushed to market when they're not necessarily scientifically ready. They don't have sort of enough sound science behind that. Is this a common reason, do you think? And what are some of the others?
Well, very, 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 very important question. Let me start from the statistics. I confirm 9 out of 10 don't make it. Now, if you are in California, in the Silicon Valley, and you have 100 projects and one of them doesn't make it, you still have the other ones on which to focus. If you have 10 projects overall and you're missing that single one, then you're in trouble. And we are more into the 10 line rather than the 100. So we have to be very careful on what we are making out as a company. Having said that, for sure, one of the problems is that many projects are becoming incorporated into startup early on without any validation per se, for many reasons. Many times it's a matter of curriculum. At least here in Italy, there was a period of time in which if you had a startup, you were a cool guy and you were cool academics and you could make your academic career going forward. absolutely no market logics. In other cases, it's an opportunity for getting some new grants, and all of these are topics which are, signing the death of the company on day one. So if you do a company for those reasons, for having a stipend because the university doesn't pay for it or things like that, then you're totally off track. Unfortunately, there is a percentage of startups who are starting for this reason. Now, taking care of that, one of the reasons why a project fails is because they don't know what they're doing. And I'm serious on this. If you look at the statistics, 42% of the startups in life science are developing things which are not needed on the market. Sounds crazy, but this is the real truth. About 1 out of 2 companies is developing something which is not needed. That's why I think that the matching with the industry is fundamental. Because and many times it's also free advice. There is plenty of opportunities out there for discussing with industry, for proposing a subject, and I've been doing it also for myself. You go onto the website of a company and you propose an idea, and most of the time you get a feedback saying whether it's a good idea or not, and for the reason why it's a good idea or not a good idea. So, it's really surprising how market feedback is available out there with respect to what one would think of. But for sure, this is one of the main reasons. I'm not saying that by having this market check early on, you are decreasing the risk. But for sure, if you combine this with the fact that you want to incorporate the company only when you are sure about not really the path forwards all the way to the market, but at least to the next, what we call minimum asset threshold. So I start a company today because in 1 year, I want to have that validation, because I know that validation will create an interesting opportunity for somebody. So I'm not developing the therapeutics, or if I'm developing therapeutics, I'm not going to develop the therapeutics all the way to the market, but I know that if I get my proof of concept on the animal, that will convince somebody that it's valuable to go forward. So this is the minimum threshold that you need to develop in order to be sure that from there onwards, you are de-risking your project and you increase the chances for somebody to join your game. That's how you create the sustainability of the project.
Thank you very much. So I had one final question for me, which is a bit more of again, going back to obviously I'm a PhD student. I talk to a lot of other PhD students, not just PhD students, but also other postgrads, other undergrads. This question is a bit about sort of strategically, thinking about starting your career. Do you sometimes there's this sort of contraposition between going to work for a large pharma first and then moving to the biotech, to the sort of more dynamic startup ecosystem later on. And some advice from other people that I've heard is that instead it's better to start from the more dynamic and in some ways more challenging ecosystem of the startups straight away, like after graduation, and maybe remain there, or what do you think? What's your advice on this? What's your take on this? Does it even matter? Or
I guess what really matters is whether you have your own ideas or whether you are going to develop somebody else's ideas. Let me explain that better. If you have throughout your PhD or postdoc program an idea and you think that idea can make it and you want to be the champion of that idea, then it makes sense to start a company and maybe get on board people that have the complementary expertise that you don't have. Alternatively, if you are not going to develop your own idea, but you're going to bring your set of expertise onto somebody else's startup, then probably sometime in other ecosystems that are not startups might help. And I'm deliberately calling them ecosystem because it doesn't mean that you have to be in a company. It could be that you are going in a IP legal office, or you because you like that part of the work, or you go to a fund because you want to learn dynamics or you run an MBA. I mean, it's the real value is what you bring on board. When you work on a startup, there is no defined diploma that tells you what to do. Okay, you are the sum of the expertise that you have brought on up to that level, and that complements somebody else's expertise. And the real value for the success of the startup is the multidisciplinary elements which are within each person of the team, not really in terms of how many different employees you have, but how many different expertise you have gone through. What I find very difficult is the changes on either side after a long time. So if you go for a short period of time into a pharma company, into a laboratory, a couple of years, learn, get the elements that you're missing, and then bring those to a startup, it makes sense. If you spend 10 or 15 years in a pharma company, you probably will have much more difficulties into jumping into the dynamics of a startup. Okay, so I would have to say that the real question is whether you're developing something coming out of your research or somebody else. The sum of the different expertise that you can bring onto the team.
Thank you very much. That certainly makes sense. It sounds like you need to have sort of your end goal in mind as well from the get-go. Yeah. So I think Emanuele now has another question.
Yeah, so I was looking if there were any other questions from the public, but I have another one that came up to my mind while you were talking. One thing as Italians and as members of the Oxford University Italian Society that we sometimes talk about is what about coming back to Italy after we finish our studies here in Oxford and in the UK in general. And especially if you think about working in a startup or working in corporate, you have two options. You can stay here. Maybe you can go to some other countries, like you can go to the United States, for example, which is kind of connected to the UK and similar ecosystem and probably even more dynamic and more money. Or you can think if you want to go back to Italy. So if we think specific to startups, we think about innovation. And for example, I have an idea. I want to build that idea into a company, into a startup. Would you recommend to an Italian graduate from our university or other university in the UK to go back to Italy to build that company, or would be something crazy to do and you should stay where you are and kind of build up that there? And I know this is a hard question, so I'm happy we're doing it at the end.
But it's a question. It's, I guess, much easier to answer now after 3 years of pandemics. The pandemics has brought down significant walls and have significantly changed the way people perceive business. And this is an incredible added advantage from somebody coming from outside going back in. Why? Because they have a network they have developed. So today you can, I'm not saying you can live virtually anywhere you want to live and separate the geographical position of where you want to live from the geographical position of your incorporated company. But it's going that direction, okay? So today it's absolutely normal to have people of the same team working in 3 different parts of the world, okay? Which was not there a few years ago. That's for sure an element. Now, if you think about specifically your period of time of a student spending years in a difficult, internationally well-recognized institution such as Oxford, that's not just work that has been done for great publication or for getting a background of information. That's an incredible value of network and contacts and opportunities and know-how about an ecosystem, which is a boost for the development of projects back in your own country. Okay, so what I want to say by that is that on the list of expertise that you want to put out there on your CV, it's not only the different technical skills that you have learned while you were working at Oxford. It's the same fact that you have been there. You know the environment, you know the people, you know the connection, you have your clinical connection, you have your market connection, whatever it is that you have developed. Every activity that you run in the public relation field is real value because you have develop your own personal network. It's your credibility. It's your level of competence that you're bringing forward. And that's something that value. Now, where to position the company? I think that if you plan to start a company looking at it from the geographical need of where you want to go to live, you're making a huge mistake because you need to decide where you want to live first. And then you incorporate the company where it makes sense for the execution plan of the company to be positioned. Now, Italy today, with respect to what happened a few years ago, it's a very nice place to be because of many things that are happening over here. I'm just citing one, Milan Innovation District, a 1 million square meter investment of land with a 4 billion investment of private money for the development of the city of the future in healthcare. That's a huge opportunity, but it's one of many. There are other there has been over the last few years and there are going to be in the future good fiscal incentives for companies. For example, up a few years ago, for every euro a startup spent on R&D, 50% came back on tax credit. That's a huge value, but you need to make a list of the different business opportunities of why you would bring the company to Italy, and then compare that with what's happening in Poland, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in other parts of the world. Because at the end of the day, you're going to put the company where it makes sense for the company to be. What are the values of Italy? Not the fact that you're living close to mom or dad, but the fact that you have a huge clinical network, the fact that there are good fiscal incentives, but maybe the same project in Poland can have an easier way for the ethical committees, or it depends on what are the operative steps. The good thing is that today the overall industrial ecosystem and financial ecosystem is ready from the mindset perspective to accept such an opportunity. And it's perfectly normal to have people living in other parts of Europe that have the company incorporated here and vice versa. This was not there a few years ago. So in this sense, I'm saying that the pandemic somehow helped. So if you are a postdoc or a PhD that has lived for a certain amount of years abroad, that have developed experiences in that ecosystem, then you need to use that opportunity because you have for sure something more in your experience the same country throughout those years. I'm saying that because I've been living in an environment where I've been told by people that if you go away and you come back, you will be on the road, because everybody else in the meantime has developed their worked towards the development of their career. And so if you're coming back after a few years, you will be an outsider. I think that it's just about the opposite, at least when you're thinking about incorporation of startups for the development of innovation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bianco, for a very stimulating and insightful discussion. It's been really great to get your opinions on the sector as a whole, but also some more practical advice and points for us sort of students and people at the very beginning of their career.
Well, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I would like to congratulate you guys for this initiative, because I think that today we are in a period of time where you start, how can I say, addressing the market or your future activity very early on. When I started, the plan was that I would do my degree, and then I would go for a PhD, and then I would start maybe embarking myself on a postdoc somewhere. And then after a postdoc, I would start brainstorming on really, do I want to stay in research or want to do something else? Okay, I'm not saying anything original. I think many of the people my age, I'm 42 now, are thinking about the same way. You know? That's what we've been trained to do. Today, this is changing drastically. On one side, there is more interest from the companies to start dialogue with people coming out of university, even at the degree level, even before the PhD. There are many programs of joint PhD with the industry. And so what you guys are doing, creating awareness about these different opportunities out there with respect to the classical PhD, postdoc, and research, academic research pathway, is really a value. And I hope that this will allow some of your students in your network to start brainstorming about the fact that, there is not, in my time, there was either good research there was academic research, or you go to the industry. So the concept was that if you want to do research, you have to stay in the university. Otherwise, you will become a perfect technician working on a biotech running PCRs. No, that's not the case anymore. There is good research and there's bad research on both sides, on the university and in the company level. And good research can be done on both places. Many times has the same type of dynamics. So, when I talk to the students, I'm running a course at the Polytechnico. The question is not really about whether you want to do research or you want to stay in the industry. The question is whether you want to run physically the experiment at the lab bench or you want to drive a scientific project. And this is probably what you should, as a student during your PhD, realize. Not whether you want to go into the public or the private sector, but whether you want to be a PI or somebody running the research, because that's going to affect how you're going to go forward. If you physically like to stay in the lab and work in the lab, then that must be your career. It doesn't have to be a technician. It could be a lab manager, but you are waking up in the morning, put on your dress, and go into the lab. Okay? A totally different story is whether you're going to manage a research, because if you want to manage research, whether as a PI at a university or in a company, then you will have to get away from the lab and start thinking about grant writing, budgeting, and all other dynamics which are on top of the science. This is the real point, okay? And both options are equally great, and both options are equally needed on the market, whether you're in the private or the public sector. But these are two different jobs. So I think that this is an early decision point because then you need to drive your career towards one of these two options.
Thank you very much. I think this distinction between sort of managing research and actually carrying it out yourself definitely hits close to home. I think it's very, it's very talked about. So I think that was all our questions. So thank you once again, Dr. Bianco, for talking to us. I would also like to thank Julia, our president, for helping, for leading the society, the whole extended committee, including the events officers and the social media officers, and everyone who joined this evening. I would also like to thank our sponsors who allow us to keep the society going. And yeah, don't forget to follow us on our social media channels, Facebook, including Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So yeah, thanks again, Dr. Bianco.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
And have a great evening.
Bye-bye.